The sirens were the first thing I heard after her scream. Then came the cold metal cuffs, biting into my wrists before I even understood what was happening. Blood, hers, was smeared on my jacket, planted while I was unconscious. They said I'd tried to kill her. That I'd snapped. That I was a monster. My own neighbors stared at me like I was filth. My family went silent. She was the perfect actress, trembling on camera, whispering my name like it was poison. But I knew her secret. I knew the shadows behind those tears weren't guilt. They were triumph. She thought she'd destroyed me with her staged attempted murder. But I didn't die in her story, I rewrote it. And when I rise, she'll realize the truth. Nothing bleeds like a liar caught in her own play. I won't forgive. I'll make her confess. Without saying a word. Before we dive into the story, tell me in the comments which country you're watching this from. I love seeing how far these stories travel, and it helps me connect with you all around the world. The night split open like a cut that wouldn't clot. Sirens smeared the street in pulsing wounds, red, blue, red, until my living room looked like it was underwater and bleeding at the same time. The banging on my door wasn't knocking, it was a verdict. Boots. Voices. The metallic snap of intent. When the lock gave way, they poured in with guns raised and faces that had already decided I was the ending to a headline. My name sounded different in their mouths, shorter, uglier, the way you say a stain you're trying to scrub out. They didn't ask questions. They arranged me. Hands on my head, cheek to the wall, breath swallowed. A flashlight washed over the coffee table, the couch, the jacket I'd left slung over a chair, her blood was on the cuff, a small brown galaxy dried into the fabric. Not possible. Not mine. Not tonight. But the beam lingered like it had found the moral of the story, and suddenly I could feel the narrative closing around my throat. Outside, the air was wet and electric. She was there, wrapped in a blanket, throat bruised, hair matted with blood that caught the light in sticky threads. The camera crews, all ready, were positioned like vultures who'd received a calendar invite. She shivered on cue. A paramedic dabbed at a cut on her forehead that looked carefully terrible, a perfect smudge of horror. When she glanced up and saw me, handcuffed, escorted, her expression didn't quite smile. It performed pain. It held long enough for the lenses. Then it softened into something saintly, tragic, almost grateful to be alive. I recognized the look. She'd rehearsed it in the mirror. We got the call at 2:37, an officer told another, loud enough for me to hear. She says he snapped. Tried to strangle her over some breakup nonsense. Managed to escape. Managed to escape. The phrase hovered, polished like a line from a press kit. I opened my mouth to speak and tasted copper and dirt. The street smelled like rain and old tires and the end of my life. In the cruiser, the world folded into reflective glass and the oily tremor of sirens. My reflection stared back with a stranger's eyes, shadowed, already guilty, already tired. Beyond my face, her silhouette trembled in the ambulance doorway as a detective rested a gentle, paternal hand on her shoulder. The cameras adored the tableau, fragile survivor, monstrous X, justice in motion. A neat little morality play with perfect blocking. At the station, cold fluorescence skinned the night. They sat me beneath a clock that ticked like a leak. When the detective arrived, he put a folder on the table like a coffin for a small animal. He didn't sit right away. He watched me, the way a man watches a match before he decides whether to snuff it or start a fire with it. Tell me how the fight started, he said. There wasn't a fight, I answered. I was home. Asleep. Neighbors heard yelling. Neighbors heard sirens. He opened the folder. Photos. Her neck, bruises shaped like fingers, deliberate and theatrical. A gash near the hairline, angled too cleanly. A shard of a wine glass with a smear that tested as her blood. A shirt of mine, from my place, with more of it on the cuff. In one photo, a lamp lay shattered beside a tipped chair, and I knew, felt, in the gut-level way you know the weight of a lie, that the room had been staged like a crime scene in a show that overshoots realism for drama. She'd always had a taste for melodrama. She called it a flair for narrative. I asked for a lawyer. He nodded, disappointed, and left the folder where I could see the future. The cell was a metal lung that breathed cold. The cot creaked like a bad memory. Somewhere down the corridor, a man coughed, then laughed, one of those laughs that belong to someone with nothing left to lose. I tried to think linearly, timeline, alibi, text messages, but the mind, when it's drowning, latches onto weird flotsam. I saw her kitchen window the first time I'd visited. The way she arranged oranges in a bowl by color gradient. The smell of her winter shampoo, peppermint and something darker. The precise way she could cry without smearing mascara, each tear balanced at the cusp of a lash like a pearl waiting for gravity's permission. Days before, she'd texted me 3 words, "I'm sorry." "Coffee?" My thumb hovered and then refused. I didn't answer. We had been done for weeks. She had her reasons, I had mine, the planet kept spinning. That night she sent a second message, just a photo of a sunrise she wasn't awake to see. Then silence. And now this, a staged apocalypse with my name spray painted across the sky. It took hours for the attorney they assigned to appear. He was competent in the way of men who fight fires all day and understand that houses still burn down. He listened. He said, "The evidence looks bad." He said, "We'll challenge chain of custody." He said, "Don't talk to anyone." The last part was easy. No one wanted to hear me anyway. By morning, the story had grown teeth. Someone shoved a newspaper through the bars, a metaphor too on the nose to be funny. My face on page 2, beside a headline that called me a rising professional with a dark side. Her face on page 1, a photo from her friend's charity event, eyes luminous, bruise tasteful. The article said she'd barely survived. It said I'd been jealous, controlling, unpredictable. It quoted a neighbor who'd never spoken to me, he always seemed intense. It is a special kind of violence to be narrated by strangers. It peels you. It reassembles you wrong. You begin to see yourself made of their words, and those words are knives. But there were seams in the story, thin, silvery threads only someone who knew her would notice. The bruise pattern, too centered, too symmetrical. The cut, wrong angle for a fall, meticulous for a struggle. The wine glass, she hated that brand, she'd told me it tasted like pennies. And the blood on my cuff. From a jacket I hadn't worn in a month, one she'd borrowed and returned with an apology about spilling perfume. Perfume doesn't stain like that. Perfume doesn't require bleach. I lay back on the cot and stared at the damp ceiling until the plaster became static. Rage rose, hot and animal, then collapsed into something colder, sharpened. She wanted chaos, noise, a tantrum in public. She wanted me to flail, to become the monster she'd choreographed. I wouldn't give her that. I would give her silence, the sharpened kind. The kind that studies. The kind that learns the architecture of a lie and then pulls the right beam at the right time so the whole edifice descends on its builder. By the time the keys scraped my cell door again, I had made the only promise that mattered. Not mercy. Not survival. Survival without justice is just a prolonged humiliation. No, my vow climbed out of me like a shadow learning to walk upright. She staged a scene to bury me. I would turn the stage lights on. I would make the audience watch her performance frame by frame, no edits, no music, no sympathetic angles, until the applause curdled into something honest. And when the curtain finally dropped, it wouldn't be on me. It would be on the actress who believed the world was her theater and I was just a prop. I would make her choke on her own story. Morning turned her into a miracle. By sunrise, she wasn't a woman who lied, she was a symbol, a sermon, a trembling halo projected in HD. The news anchors pronounced her name like a prayer, then let it break into a soft, wounded silence. B-roll floated across the screen, the ambulance doors closing, the blanket around her shoulders, the bruise blossoming like a dark flower at her throat. Comments attacked me in every language. Hashtags hatched and multiplied. Even the hate sounded gentle when it was aimed at a survivor. She didn't just occupy the narrative, she furnished it, candles lit, curtains open, a camera-friendly grief placed neatly at center stage. My lawyer slid a tablet across the metal table. "Don't read the comments," he said. I read them all. People who had never met me itemized my character like coroner's notes. Every old photo of me became evidence. In one, I was squinting against sun, they said it was the glare of a guilty man. In another, my arm was around a friend's shoulder, they called it possessive. A distant cousin wrote a paragraph about how I'd always been intense. A former coworker typed that I was driven, maybe too driven. The internet loves a pile-on because it looks like justice from a distance. She understood that better than anyone. Her first interview aired at noon. She sat beneath soft studio lights, the bruise peaking like a signature. The host adopted the mournful cadence reserved for funerals and miracle survivals. "Take your time," he said. She did, her silences were artful, precise. She told the story with clinical fragility. We'd argued, I'd snapped, her world had gone black around a pair of hands she'd once trusted. The camera crept closer until her eyes filled the screen, glistening, as if the country could float inside them and forgive itself for loving this spectacle. But her tells were there, the same ones I'd learned when we were together. The way she tucked hair behind her ear when she lied. The micro smile that visited her mouth when the host said brave. The way she paused before I forgive him, measuring the impact like a composer considering one last note. Forgiveness. She offered it to me like a poisoned ring, too generous, too saintly, because saints sell. Monsters sell more. And then there was the fund. A friend launched it to help her heal. The goal was modest at first, then not. Comments overflowed with money and love and weaponized pity. Her social feeds filled with portraits, no, paintings of her endurance. A photographer captured her looking out a rain-dappled window, the bruise tastefully visible, hand on glass. The caption read, "Looking forward, not back." She shared it with a broken heart emoji, then a dove. The post hit 1 million views by evening. She thanked everyone, voice note trembling, and slipped in a line about legal fees. Angels tapped their cards. The detective came back with an update smile. Public pressure, he said, means the DA will move fast. Fast is a blade when you're on the wrong side of it. He mentioned a protective order. He mentioned a hearing. He mentioned, with the gentleness of a man easing a patient into bad news, that my employer had called leave of absence indefinite. People love to say until things are resolved when what they mean is until you're gone. I tried to map her motives like a coastline: money, fame, revenge, the thrill of controlling the weather. But one contour rose higher than the rest, bright as a lighthouse: power. She loved the way rooms listened to her, the way people leaned in, the way attention rinsed her clean. With this story, she'd baptized herself in a river that never ran dry. The first time she cried in front of me, I thought it was honesty. Later, I learned it was technique, tears as punctuation. Now, she wept for the nation. They applauded. Except not everyone. In the avalanche of sympathy, 2 small rocks held. A paramedic posted anonymously about inconsistencies in injury patterns on a popular forum. The thread vanished within hours, but not before someone screenshotted it. And a crime scene blogger, the kind who reads autopsy textbooks for pleasure, wrote a quiet, careful post about the geometry of those bruises, symmetry that suggested application, not struggle. The post didn't trend. Truth rarely does. But I read it until the letters blurred. From my side of the glass, the facts kept coughing up static. My key fob logs showed I'd never left the building that night. A neighbor's hallway camera captured only the blue slur of police lights, not her. The blood on my jacket, too bright when photographed for something supposedly hours old. Little fractures. Hairline. Nothing a jury would feel through TV glare. But fractures widen with time and pressure. I would supply both. My parents visited once, their faces hushed with a grief they couldn't name. My mother touched the glass like she could smooth a wrinkle from my life. My father stared at me as if memorizing the shape of a son who was being rewritten. "We know you," he said. It was both everything and not enough. I nodded like a loyal, obedient ghost. That night, the station TV played her second interview on loop. Different studio. Same lighting. She wore white this time, a tactical choice. She spoke about trauma with a therapist who nodded like a metronome. She described waking with nightmares, then catching her breath on the balcony, watching the city lights pulse like a warning. "I just want to feel safe again," she whispered, and that whisper erected a scaffold around an entire campaign: safety, awareness, the war cry of people who have never had to check the cost of a cause. She was meticulous even in her grief. No raw edges. No mess. Survivors are allowed to be messy, should be, but she preferred immaculate suffering, laminated and fit for a coffee table. The city obliged by naming a charity walk in her honor. A boutique offered a limited necklace, the proceeds for victim advocacy. She wore it on camera and thanked them, eyes wet, voice small. Sales sold out in minutes. In the cell, I built a funeral for my old life and buried it neatly, no service. I sharpened what remained. I asked my attorney for discovery. I requested timestamps, chain of custody logs, body cam footage. He said it was early. I said early is when predators relax. He sighed, then filed. While we waited, I drew the map again, her routes, her friends, her habits. I traced the arc of her new fame, the way sponsors began orbiting her tragedy like moths who believed in currency. She believed she was untouchable now. That's the thing about applause, it's a drug that swaps humility for a crown. She stood on a balcony in a photo, head tilted, smear of sunset behind her, the caption, "Some monsters don't hide under beds." The comments, "We stand with you. He will pay. Queen." She liked them all, then posted a quote about truth always winning. Under it, I wrote nothing. I memorized everything. The perfect victim had built herself a palace of light. It was time to find the switch buried in the dark, one little, unglamorous switch, So when I flipped it, every chandelier would explode at once and the guests would finally see the wires. And the actress would see the stagehands waiting with handcuffs just off camera. By the time the bail hearing ended, the story had stopped being a case and become a show. Every screen glowed with her face, sometimes tearful, sometimes serene, always haloed by captions that promised moral clarity. Talk shows, podcasts, late-night monologues, everyone wanted a share of the outrage. They called it the attempted murder miracle, as if the world had been waiting for a villain who wore my name like a brand. When I walked into court, the cameras outnumbered the witnesses. Their shutters chattered like insects. Inside, the air smelled of microphones and fear. My attorney whispered strategy, but his voice drowned in the buzz outside the doors. Each headline added weight to the cuffs I no longer wore. Her testimony played in endless loops. She sat straight-backed, hands folded, voice small enough to sound pure. The prosecutor repeated her words until they sounded rehearsed, because they were, but nobody cared. The public wanted the story, not the truth. The jurors pretended not to watch the news, the judge pretended not to read the comments. Pretending became policy. Then the footage leaked, me leaving work an hour before the supposed attack. The timestamp didn't match the police report, but the news anchors barely blinked. A clerical error, they said. Irrelevant detail. Facts were fragile, feelings were bulletproof. My parents stopped answering unknown numbers. Friends vanished like smoke. Even the neighbors I'd helped during storms crossed the street. When I returned to my apartment, I found pamphlets taped to my door about anger management support. Someone had scratched monster into the paint of my car. Still, tiny fractures formed behind the perfect narrative. A local blogger noted that every charity she promoted had the same payment processor, one registered to her cousin. Another noticed that the bruise on her neck shifted sides in 2 separate interviews. The posts went largely unnoticed, but I saved screenshots, times, and links. The truth doesn't need volume, it needs patience. My lawyer called it obsession. I called it air. Each night, I replayed every interview, studying the way she controlled her breath, the flicker in her eyes when she mentioned evidence that hadn't yet been public. She was either careless or confident enough to think no one would catch it. I began cataloging her words like artifacts from a dig, layer after layer, until patterns emerged. The news reached a fever pitch when she announced a documentary deal. The trailer opened with my mugshot fading into her smiling recovery portrait. Survivor, the voiceover said, turned advocate. The first episode dropped the following week. Every download felt like another door slamming shut. But truth has a way of humming beneath the noise. Late one night, while reviewing body cam footage released under Discovery, I noticed something small, a reflection in a mirror behind her during the initial police sweep, 2 figures, not one. A shadow moving away from the frame just before the officer turned the camera. Not me. Too tall, wrong build. Someone else had been there. I leaned closer to the screen until the pixels blurred. For the first time in months, my heart didn't pound from panic but from possibility. Maybe I wasn't just defending myself anymore. Maybe I was beginning to prosecute. The next morning, I printed the frame and slid it into a folder labeled Truth, Exhibit A. The trial wasn't over. It had barely started. And the audience that crowned her a saint was about to discover how easily light can turn back into fire. The reflection shouldn't have existed. In the body cam footage, the officer sweeps past her living room, a jittery arc of light, and for a single, stingy second the lens catches a sliver of mirror by the hallway, her wrapped in a blanket, a paramedic's shoulder, and behind them, a figure slipping out of frame. Too tall to be me. Too broad. The posture wrong, confident, casual, as if walking through a set he knew better than the script. The officer turns, the moment dies, and the official story keeps breathing. I looped those 20 frames until the pixels looked like snow. My lawyer glanced over, weariness folded into his voice. You're hunting ghosts. Ghosts leave footprints, I said. If they think they don't, that's arrogance, not magic. He shrugged but didn't argue when I asked him to file another discovery motion for all bodycam angles in the original metadata. While he played the slow chess of procedure, I went analog, printer ink, yellow legal pads, a wall of dates and arrows. I marked every instance she described the attack and underlined the words she repeated: slammed, glass, breathless, escape. In interview 3, she added a new verb, dragged. It rang like a bell she'd forgotten to ring earlier. People who lived events don't edit their verbs. Performers do. The hallway camera in her building had malfunctioned that night. Convenient. But malfunctions have paper trails if someone bothers to look. I visited the superintendent under the pretext of scouting a place to rent. We talked faucets and noise. I waited until he warmed to his own voice, then asked about the security system, bad coverage in older buildings, right? He nodded and complained about a firmware update 2 months ago that reset half the timestamps to some factory day in 2018. He rolled his eyes, offered me coffee, and mentioned the installer by name, the cousin of a tenant on the 4th floor. I wrote down the name like it was a confession. That night I returned, legally, during visiting hours with my attorney to review evidence at the station. The tech room hummed like a hospital. Screens everywhere. A weary sergeant pulled up the raw body cam files. "You won't find anything new," he said, then left us alone with the hum. Metadata is a diary machines keep when people lie. File creation, camera ID, frame rate drift, GPS pings. In the log, one entry blinked irregular. An 11-minute slice from the first responding officer showed a 1-second desync, corrected on export. Ordinarily, nothing. But that 1 second coincided with the mirror frame. A correction isn't a cut. Still, it meant a hand had touched the footage after capture. I took a photo of the log. My attorney frowned. "This isn't proof, it's a seam," I told him. Seam split under pressure. Back home, I put on the documentary trailer again. I muted it, scrubbed frame by frame. In a blink and die shot of the crime scene, a bookshelf held a decorative black sphere the size of a peach, half hidden between plant leaves. I'd seen dozens like it in tech blogs, discreet nanny cams masquerading as decor. In older photos of her apartment, the shelf was empty. In a photo posted a week before the attack, there it was, new, glossy, smug. Not a sponsor product. No tag. No credit. She credited everything. If the sphere was a camera, it saw everything her story choreographed. If it wasn't, if I was chasing a reflection and a hope, then I was the man people said I was, unhinged, desperate, inventing miracles. I traced the brand from a glint in the reflection, a faint silver ring around the lens that only one manufacturer used. Their support line routed me to a portal. I typed the model number and read the manual like it was scripture. Factory default, continuous local recording plus motion triggered cloud clips. Cloud provider, a white label company with a bland name and airtight policies, locked tight unless the owner shared access or a court demanded it. Courts move on wheels greased by headlines and calendars. Owners move at the speed of ego. She posted another video that night, a fragile update about learning to sleep again, about trusting the process, about not letting the past win. In the background, blurred but present, the black sphere glowed with the faintest standby light. She hadn't even bothered to unplug it. Confidence makes people lazy. I needed that footage. I needed it without tipping my hand. I created a new email, the kind of bland username that dissolves in crowds, and messaged her through the fund platform as a security consultant volunteering to harden survivor homes. I referenced the exact model of her nanny cam and attached a PDF with generic best practices. At the end, I included a line about a known firmware exploit allowing remote deletion, happy to help you secure your cloud. Most people hear exploit and imagine wolves. Within an hour, she replied. Polite, cautious, curious. She CC'd her assistant, a name I didn't recognize. The signature block included a shared link to a dummy folder where, she wrote, our team stores household device info for vendors. She wanted to be seen as professional. She wanted processes, assistants, teams, the architecture of legitimacy. She sent a second link, temporary credentials for a review account on the camera cloud so I could verify the security posture. The arrogance was almost tender. I opened the link with hands I forced to stay steady. The dashboard bloomed, thumbnails of motion events, date-stamped and neat. I scrolled past the week after the attack. Nothing. Then the night itself, a cluster of clips around 2:21 a.m. through 2:41 a.m. The titles were generic, Event 47, Event 48, but their edges shook with content. I clicked the first. The living room, empty. A shadow flicker at the hallway. I clicked the second. The door. The camera auto-exposed on motion and caught a man's shoulder sliding into view, broad, athletic, wearing a hoodie with a team logo partially visible when he turned. He crossed to the kitchen. He moved like he belonged. He put on gloves like he'd done it before. Clip 49, her entering barefoot, carrying a bag. She set it down and pulled out. Props. A small vial. A dress shirt I recognized. She dabbed the cuff against her fingers, then the vial against her temple with calibrated pressure, wincing before the pain arrived, rehearsed. The man adjusted a lamp, tipped a chair, positioned a broken glass near the rug, then stepped back to watch her test angles on her phone camera. They compared. She deleted. They compared again. He kissed her forehead like a co-conspirator collecting payment. When sirens finally smeared light across the windows, they were ready. She slumped into place, he moved down the hall, and at 2:37 a.m. she dialed with the wet breaths of an actress who trusts her audience. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until my lungs demanded air. I watched every clip. I watched them twice. I downloaded copies and mirrored them to 3 drives, then printed stills and stapled them into a booklet that turned my stomach and steeled my spine. When I finished, dawn had bleached the city into a tired miracle. I closed the laptop and smiled for the first time since the cuffs. I called my attorney. He arrived with coffee and disbelief, then watched the clips with his jaw tightening, then loosening into something like awe. Chain of custody, he said automatically, because that's what you say when the truth lands like a meteor. We'll need to subpoena the provider, verify server logs, obtain a warrant. We will, I said. But she gave me access. She opened the gate. We walk through before she notices it's gone. He nodded slowly. Careful. If she's as arrogant as you say, she'll assume she's invincible. That's when people start rehearsing their victory speech. Good, I said. Let her practice. I exported the mirror frame from the body cam and taped it beside a still of the man turning his head just enough for the logo to sharpen. A regional basketball team. I knew someone who knew someone. The city isn't infinite, it's a web. The assistant in her email signature? A ghost online, 2 job listings, no history, a burner. But the cousin who installed the hallway cameras had a public account full of Jim's selfies and courtside photos. In one, he posed with a player whose hoodie matched the logo. His caption, "Family always wins." Family. She hadn't staged this alone. She never did anything alone. She delegated. She directed. She collected applause like rent. The perfect victim had hired a stagehand with a jersey. The hidden camera had recorded their rehearsal. The story that murdered my life had an outtake reel. And now I had it. The video changed everything, but it also left a question breathing between every frame. Why? People lie for gain, for panic, for pleasure, but her lie was an ecosystem. It required planning, actors, lighting cues. Nobody builds something that elaborate without believing it serves a higher purpose. I needed to understand the religion that powered her devotion to deceit. The man in the hoodie became my compass. The team logo led to a local semi-pro club. Rosters came and went, but a single name overlapped with her cousin, the same one who'd installed the building's cameras. I scrolled through social posts, tagged parties, charity events. There she was, champagne in hand, him in the background, blurred but present, eyes on her like an understudy watching a lead he secretly adored. I traced digital fingerprints, metadata on photos, timestamps on likes, the geography of admiration. He'd commented on every public picture she'd ever posted, even the ones buried years deep. Simple emojis, fire, hearts, applause. And once, months before the attack, a comment that now read like prophecy, "You make danger look beautiful." When I showed the printouts to my attorney, he frowned. Circumstantial, he said. Motivation isn't a straight line, I replied. It's handwriting, you recognize it by the pressure. We petitioned the court for a preservation order on the camera footage, then sealed copies in evidence lockers. I watched her public life from a distance. She was preparing for a televised gala honoring survivors. The same network that aired her documentary was footing the bill. She posted rehearsal photos, makeup chairs, a gold dress that turned sympathy into marketing. Each caption read like an incantation, "Healing is the loudest revenge." She still didn't know the footage existed, or that I had it. That ignorance became my armor. I spent nights building timelines, mapping her charity's bank transfers, tracing donations that circled back through shell accounts to her cousin's company. Each breadcrumb was small, but together they drew a shape, a triangle of money, image, and influence. The charity was less a foundation than a funnel. Her story wasn't just survival, it was currency. One evening I received an anonymous message. I used to work for her team. She keeps everything on paper. Check the storage unit under the old stage name. Attached was a receipt for a facility on the edge of the city. My attorney warned against going, but curiosity and exhaustion outweigh caution. We rented a legitimate unit next door and waited for the manager to make his rounds. The lock on hers bore fresh scratches, suggesting it had been opened recently. Through the thin partition wall, I heard the scrape of cardboard and faint music, the same playlist she'd used during interviews, slow piano dressed as sincerity. A week later, the manager called my lawyer, routine audit, her payment overdue. The unit was entered legally for inventory. Inside, costumes, press badges, duplicate IDs, binders of supporter data. It read like the biography of someone auditioning for multiple lives at once. In a folder labeled Press Prep sat cue cards, each line of dialogue highlighted: where to pause, when to tremble. At the bottom, a handwritten note: never let silence belong to him. The prosecutor still called her the victim. Publicly, I said nothing. Privately, the balance was shifting. Forensic auditors traced her charity's funds to offshore accounts. The cousin disappeared from social media the day subpoenas landed. The man in the hoodie deactivated his profiles, but his digital footprint stayed, tagged photos, check-ins, geolocation residue. Piece by piece, the stagehands were losing their exits. When news reached her that investigators were reviewing new materials, she scheduled another interview, her most polished yet. She smiled through the opening question. Truth, she said, always finds light. I watched from my apartment, the glow of the screen painting my hands in the same sterile white as the studio lights. For the first time, I saw the hairline crack in her performance. Not fear, anticipation. She knew something was shifting but couldn't locate the source. Control was her addiction, and withdrawal had begun. That night, I opened the window and let the city noise wash in, sirens distant, engines low, a pulse that reminded me the world kept spinning outside this war of perception. The footage, the documents, the financial trail, all of it was now in the hands of people who understood how to build cases without emotion. My part was nearly finished. She had built a persona out of tragedy, and for a while the world believed her because she offered them an easy morality play: villain, victim, redemption. But the audience was starting to notice the script looping. Every repetition dulls sympathy, every over-rehearsed tear invites suspicion. In the following days, the investigation widened quietly. Reporters began whispering about irregularities. Her manager released statements about clerical confusion. The charity's website went offline for maintenance. The applause that had followed her everywhere began to falter, replaced by questions shaped like knives. Why was there no police confirmation of injuries? Why are donors asking for refunds? Who was the man seen leaving her building that night? I watched her smile harden in newer photos, the posture stiffening into self-defense. The performance that once made her invincible was becoming a cage she couldn't escape. The woman behind the mask was beginning to surface, blinking in the sudden daylight of her own invention. And for the first time since the night the sirens came, I felt the ground shift toward balance. Not vengeance. Just gravity, inevitable, patient, and deafening when it finally arrives. Truth, when it finally starts to surface, doesn't rise clean. It drags the weeds with it. The first article appeared on a Tuesday morning. Questions emerge about charity finances. It ran below the fold, polite, almost apologetic, but it carried a scent that newsrooms recognize, the smell of a story that could grow teeth. By nightfall, half a dozen outlets had repeated it, adding their own adjectives, inconsistencies, discrepancies, concerns. None of them said fraud, not yet, but the word waited in the wings like an understudy warming its voice. I read every line from the quiet of my apartment. No satisfaction, just the dull pulse of inevitability. When a structure is built on invention, gravity only needs time. The investigators followed the trail we'd handed them: invoices signed by non-existent vendors, wire transfers routed through consulting firms, campaign videos paid for twice. Each discovery snapped another thread of the web she'd spun around herself. On screen she still smiled, still spoke of healing and awareness, but the tempo had changed. Her interviews were shorter, her voice slightly faster, like a musician rushing through a song she no longer believes in. Comment sections shifted tone, from worship to worry. Someone posted screenshots of the duplicate donations. Someone else posted a side-by-side of her bruises from different interviews, asking why they didn't match. A fact-checker noticed the timestamp on one photo predated the attack by 2 days. The internet doesn't stay loyal, it just looks for the next storm. My lawyer called. They've opened a full audit, he said. We'll need to testify eventually. Good, I answered. Let the evidence speak. He paused. You sound calm. I'm tired, I said. Calm is what tired looks like. At dusk I walked the river path behind the courthouse, the same route I'd taken when I still believed life was linear. The city lights jittered on the water, red and white, like heartbeats trapped under glass. Every step felt heavier with memory but lighter with proof. 2 weeks later, the cousin was subpoenaed. He tried to disappear behind a lawyer and a new haircut, but documents don't change style. His bank records aligned perfectly with the charity withdrawals. The man in the hoodie, the one from the footage, was identified as a maintenance contractor who'd received consulting payments on the same dates as the falsified invoices. Their names now sat together in official files, black ink sealing what I'd already known. Still, she denied everything. She called it persecution. She said men were trying to silence her. The irony almost collapsed under its own weight. When reporters asked about the footage, she laughed, too brightly, and said deepfakes were a plague of our time. But the server logs we'd secured showed the data trail, her account, her upload, her deletion attempts. Facts have fingerprints. By the third week, sponsors began reevaluating partnerships. A glossy magazine pulled its upcoming cover. The charity walk was postponed out of respect for ongoing inquiries. On social media she went quiet for 48 hours, and silence, once her enemy, returned as her only defense. I spent those days watching the pattern unfold, people she'd charmed issuing statements, friends unfollowing, the polite vocabulary of abandonment. The web was unraveling, but not through force, through the same public that once crowned her. The applause that built her cage was now dismantling it piece by piece. Late one night my lawyer forwarded an internal memo from investigators, subject scheduled for interview, voluntary. I pictured her rehearsing answers, arranging posture, trying to summon the perfect tear. But the stage lights were dimmer now, and the audience restless. The morning of the interview, news helicopters circled above the courthouse. She arrived flanked by 2 attorneys, hair immaculate, smile intact. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded, and for a brief second she met my eyes across the steps. Recognition flickered, half anger, half disbelief that I still existed outside the script she'd written. Then she looked away. Inside, I waited in a separate room. Through the thin wall I could hear the rhythm of questions, dates, receipts, signatures. No shouting. Just paper, ticking clock, the slow dismantling of a myth. The hearing lasted 4 hours. When she emerged, the mask finally showed its cracks, not destroyed, just exhausted from holding shape for too long. That night, a journalist called me for comment. "Do you feel vindicated?" she asked. I thought about the sirens, the cuffs, the empty months between then and now. Vindication felt like a word from someone else's language. "I feel," I said, "like the truth finally remembered my name." The story wasn't finished. Courtrooms would follow, headlines would flare and fade. But the web that once held me was now collapsing inward, strands tightening around its own architect. And somewhere behind the noise, beneath the layers of public curiosity and legal phrasing, the simple outline of justice began to take shape, quiet, patient, unglamorous, and real. For the first time in a long while, the silence belonged to me. Freedom arrived without ceremony. One morning, the clerk handed me a single-page stamped case dismissed pending further investigation. No parade, no apology, just a line of text that meant not guilty enough to keep in a cage. I folded it once and slipped it into my pocket. It felt lighter than it should have, lighter than everything it replaced. Outside the courthouse, autumn had scraped color from the trees. The city looked almost clean, like it was trying to forget me. I walked through the crowd unnoticed, another face between headlines. Months earlier, those same sidewalks had echoed with whispers, cameras, pity disguised as outrage. Now they held only the hum of people rushing somewhere else. Scandals age faster than seasons. I found a coffee shop that hadn't existed when the world ended. The barista didn't recognize me, which was its own kind of mercy. The first sip burned. Good. Pain that belonged to me. I watched the street through the window, remembering how it had looked the night of the arrest, sirens painting everything red, the word murder still fresh in the air. That memory still pulsed under the skin, but it no longer dictated the rhythm of my heart. My attorney called. "They're reopening the investigation," he said. "Different angle now. You won't be a defendant this time." "What am I?" "Key witness." The words hung there. It sounded almost holy, but witnesses don't get closure, they get paperwork. Still, it meant my name would finally appear next to evidence instead of accused. That afternoon, I visited the building I hadn't entered since the night everything burned. The landlord had replaced the locks and painted over the damage. New tenants. New laughter echoing up the stairwell. I stood outside long enough to watch a delivery driver drop a box, curse softly, and move on. Life had replaced the scene of the crime without asking permission. I envied that kind of forgetting. Across the street, a billboard advertised the network that once glorified her story. The slogan, "Real Truth, Real Lives," looked different now, almost sarcastic. I remembered the producers who'd interviewed my neighbors, the reporters who'd waited outside the jail, their questions sharpened to draw blood. None of them had called for follow-ups. Truth doesn't trend like tragedy. Back at my apartment, I opened the folders stacked on the desk, copies of the footage, financial records, timestamps. Proof, pure and heavy. The investigators had all of it now, but I kept duplicates because history has a habit of erasing evidence that makes it uncomfortable. I labeled the box archive, sealed it with tape, and slid it into the closet. The sound, cardboard against wood, felt final. Days passed. News trickled out slowly, her cousin cooperating, her accounts frozen, the charity offices under review. Then came the first televised statement from prosecutors confirming credible evidence of fabrication. The anchors who had once called her courageous now used words like alleged, unverified, under scrutiny. Their voices wobbled between caution and embarrassment. I walked at night to avoid the noise. The city had changed, I had too. Every streetlight looked like a question, every shadow like an unfinished sentence. Sometimes I thought I saw her face on passing screens, reruns, documentaries still queued in digital limbo. The networks hadn't pulled them yet. She was still frozen in those frames, forever the trembling survivor the world once believed in. Maybe that was its own punishment, to live as a relic of a lie no one wants to replay but no one can delete. The first person to recognize me was an old neighbor. She stopped mid-stride, groceries clutched to her chest. She began, but language betrayed her. I spared her the apology. "It's fine," I said. We were all watching the same movie. Relief and guilt tangled on her face. She nodded, whispered welcome back, and hurried away. Each small encounter stitched me slowly back into ordinary life. A store clerk joked about the weather. A bus driver held the door. Nothing monumental, just tiny proofs that I existed beyond accusation. I learned to let silence be peace instead of punishment. Then, one evening, an email arrived from an unknown sender. "You don't know me, but I believed her. I taught my students about her case as an example of courage. I'm sorry." I reread it 3 times before replying with 2 words, "So was I." Because I had believed in her once, too. Belief isn't weakness, it's the currency of the deceived. She'd simply spent mine better. Weeks later, investigators asked me to appear again, this time to review the final sequence of footage, confirm identities, provide context. I watched the clips on a government laptop, sterile, labeled, evidence numbers blinking in corners. When it ended, the room stayed quiet. No applause, no outrage, just the steady hum of truth settling into record. Walking out, I realized the return wasn't about revenge or redemption. It was about gravity reasserting itself. The world had tilted, and now it was slowly righting. She had built an empire from fiction. I had been its collapse. And though the silence that followed wasn't forgiveness, it was enough to breathe in without tasting smoke. The investigation had turned into quiet machinery. Lawyers, auditors, digital forensics teams, all moving with the unhurried precision of people who know time favors truth. I no longer had to push. The current was doing the work for me. She, however, had started fighting the tide. Her publicist issued new statements every week. Each one tried to retell the story in softer colors: misunderstandings, miscommunications, overzealous assistance. The phrasing kept changing, but the theme stayed the same. She was still the victim, only now the monster wore a different mask: bureaucracy, jealousy, online mobs. The press releases were elegant: desperation always dresses well at first. When her bank accounts froze, she moved interviews to independent podcasts, places that didn't fact-check, that still wanted tears and redemption arcs. She blamed data manipulation, hinted at a shadowy smear campaign. Every excuse added a fresh crack to the porcelain. People can forgive mistakes, but they recoil from contradictions. The cracks made a sound, you could almost hear the pitch rising. Investigators shared progress with me through my attorney. The forensics confirmed the video's authenticity: no deepfake, no edit seam. They recovered the deleted clips straight from the cloud host. The timestamps matched the police timeline to the second. The man in the hoodie was positively identified. Payments between his account and hers sat in black and white statements. The chain was complete. All we had to do was wait. Waiting was its own kind of storm. I filled days with small work, repairing the apartment, walking the same streets that once judged me, watching the city learn to forget. At night, I wrote notes in a plain notebook: every conversation, every headline, every time the truth twitched under the surface. I wasn't writing a memoir, I was leaving breadcrumbs in case the world's attention span failed again. Then came the subpoena that wasn't mine. She was ordered to surrender all digital devices related to the charity. Phones, laptops, tablets, props of her empire. Her lawyer protested, the court insisted. The devices arrived sealed, pristine, still smelling of designer leather and expensive perfume. Forensics opened them, cloned them, and found what arrogance always leaves behind: drafts of messages never sent, test recordings, selfies with stage makeup half applied. And emails, hundreds, between her and the cousin, detailing content strategy, negotiating fake invoices, scheduling incidents to align with donation drives. Each message carried its own temperature, flippant, greedy, casual. The tone of people who have never been told no. When the findings leaked, the public mood shifted from suspicion to disbelief to anger. Donors demanded refunds. Sponsors released coordinated apologies. Even her fiercest supporters began to speak in the past tense. She was brave, she was inspiring. Online, sympathy curdled into the cold fascination reserved for fallen idols. The web that had once protected her began eating itself. I watched it unfold with a strange detachment. This wasn't triumph, it was physics. Lies collapse when they outgrow their architecture. Still, she tried one more performance. A press conference, unsanctioned, announced via livestream, a single camera in her living room. I knew the set by heart. She appeared tired, wrapped in that same gold dress, makeup imperfect. Her voice trembled, but not the way it used to. She spoke about betrayal, about people twisting a tragedy. She never said my name, but she didn't have to. Her hands shook as she lifted a stack of papers, the audit report, redacted lines visible through translucent pages. They want to destroy me, she said. They want to silence survivors. The irony almost broke the screen. Halfway through her broadcast, viewers noticed something strange. A light blinked behind her, small, rhythmic, reflected in the mirror near the hallway. It was the same camera she'd used months ago, still mounted, still live. Its own internal system began streaming automatically to the cloud the moment motion was detected. And because investigators had already cloned the account, they received the feed in real time. It recorded everything, the half-scripted monologue, the off-camera coaching from someone who thought they were muted, the whispered rehearsal of tears. It caught her looking into the lens after ending the stream, whispering, "Did it sound believable?" Within hours, the clip circulated. Even the most sympathetic outlets couldn't edit around it. She had walked straight back into her own snare. The next morning, headlines turned merciless, fabricated abuse claim collapses after new recording. Commentators who once wept for her now spoke with forensic precision about credibility, accountability, the danger of false narratives. The network pulled her documentary from every platform. Her sponsors erased posts like they were scrubbing graffiti. My phone buzzed constantly, reporters, producers, lawyers. I answered none of them. The story didn't need me anymore, it was devouring itself. When I finally stepped outside, rain had begun to fall, steady and unshowy. The sidewalks were empty, washed clean of posters and slogans. I stood under a street lamp and let the water soak through my jacket. It smelled of metal and renewal. For the first time, I wasn't hiding from the light. It was hers that had gone out. She had built a lie so intricate it required constant oxygen, endless attention. And in trying to revive it, she'd handed the world the proof of its artifice. Her own trap, self-designed, perfectly baited, impeccably timed, had closed with mathematical precision. And the only sound left was the click of the lock she'd built herself. The day the truth went live, the city looked ordinary. Buses hissed, coffee steamed, a dog tugged a leash like it had somewhere better to be. Thunder gathered behind the clouds without committing to rain. I took that as a sign, pressure building, the sky holding its breath. 2 nights earlier, the network that once canonized her called my attorney. Carefully worded, legally armored, an offer to air a corrective special. Not a retraction, that would admit fault. A clarifying update. They wanted time codes, corroboration, independent experts. They wanted absolution wrapped in journalism. I didn't owe them grace, but I did owe the truth a microphone. We said yes, with one condition: everything plays uncut. No sympathetic violins. No lens that remembers her halo. The studio they assigned me was smaller than the one that launched her. No audience, just lights, colder than I remembered, and a table the color of warnings. A producer adjusted the angle of my chair by exactly 2 inches, then asked if I preferred water or tea in the same voice you used to ask about last words. I looked into the glass of the teleprompter and saw what the country would see, a face thinner than the one in the mugshot, eyes steadied by months of carrying facts like weights. Across the building, she occupied a separate stage. Her team had agreed to appear live, to address malicious misinformation. She still believed in the power of the first person to speak. She'd forgotten that truth isn't a sprint, it's a tide. The network split the broadcast into 3 acts: her statement, expert analysis, evidence review. But the order changed an hour before we went on air. Not my doing. The suits had learned from the last time, they wanted authentication first. They wanted to be seen choosing light over heat. At exactly 8:03 p.m., the title card dissolved and the feed cut to the forensics lab the network had hired, third party, reputationally bulletproof. A calm woman in a blue blazer explained the chain of custody, server logs, checksum hashes. The words were dry, the kind nobody remembers, and yet they carried the weight of a gavel. Then she pressed play. The living room appeared, the decorative black spheres unblinking eye taking in the choreography of a lie. We watched the man in the hoodie adjust the lamp, watched her test bruises like costume fittings, watched the rehearsal of terror. The clip played to the end, the sirens flaring against the glass, the phone lifted with practiced breaths. Silence held afterward, not the reverent kind, but the airless pause a room makes when its temperature shifts. The feed cut to me. "Is this what you provided?" The anchor asked, voice careful. "Yes." "How certain are you of its integrity?" "As certain as anyone can be of sunrise," I said. "No swagger. Just bone." They switched to her. The camera found her face already arranged for martyrdom. "Deepfake," she said immediately. "Coordinated harassment. He's obsessed." She glanced off screen, seeking a cue. The delay between her eyes and her mouth told its own story. The anchor returned to the expert. "Deepfake?" "No," the expert said simply, and listed the reasons: hardware signatures, network traces, embedded device IDs, legal warrants that unlocked the cloud. On a split screen, the receipts stacked like bricks. Payment to the man in the hoodie. Emails about scene direction. Draft captions for posts that hadn't happened yet. Each piece slid into place with the frictionless certainty of a door finding its frame. The network then did the one thing she never expected. They rolled her newest live stream, the one where the nanny cam accidentally captured the rehearsal after the broadcast ended. The moment she whispered, "Did it sound believable?" the room changed temperature. The anchor didn't comment. He didn't need to. Somewhere, millions of living rooms exhaled a syllable that wasn't quite a word. Her lawyer cut in, demanded equal time, objected to trial by television. The anchor nodded, granted it, and asked the only clean question left: "If you were attacked, who is the man assisting you before the police arrive?" Her eyes flashed, rage, then calculation, then the familiar porcelain calm. "A friend who came after. To help me. Process." The clip's timestamp sat on screen like a metronome counting her lie. 2:28 a.m. The 911 call, 2:37 a.m. Processing time traveled now. Viewers sent in questions. Producers chose the kind that lanced cleanly: the duplicate invoices, the cousin, the charity refunds. She tried to pivot to the pain of reliving trauma, but the words had lost their purchase. You can't sell weather to a town that's already seen the flood maps. Then came the part I hadn't planned but had quietly hoped for. The man in the hoodie called in through his attorney. Not visual, just audio, a voice filtered flat by legal caution. He didn't confess to conspiracy. He didn't have to. He acknowledged the payments. He acknowledged being in the apartment. He said he was following instructions to stage a scene for content collateral. It was the clinical language of people who refuse to name what they've done. Still, it was a bridge burned on live television. She broke then, not theatrically, not with sobs, but with the small, brittle laugh of someone who realizes the room no longer believes in their gravity. "This is a smear," she said. "This is violence." The word echoed, hollow in a place that had once amplified her. She looked into the camera and tried to summon the country she used to hold. It didn't come. The anchor turned back to me. "What do you want?" "A trap disguised as kindness." "Quiet," I said. "And for the people who were taken in by this, for their donations, their faith, to be returned." "You don't want an apology?" "Apologies are lines. I'm finished with scripts." The broadcast closed on the expert's final verification: timestamps aligned, devices matched, funds traced. No crescendo music, no elegy. Just the dull, resounding thud of a door locking from the outside. When the lights dropped, the studio went soft around the edges. I sat alone for a breath, letting the silence settle on my skin like the first honest rain after a long, soured summer. A producer whispered into a headset. The anchor rubbed his eyes. Someone laughed in the distant way people laugh when their worldview has been rearranged and they need sound to prove the floor still holds. Outside, the night had finally decided to storm. Wind shouldered the trees, rain dissolved the neon into watercolor. My phone rattled, messages from numbers I didn't know, a few I did. I read none of them. I slipped the network's visitor badge into my pocket, where the dismissal notice had once lived. Paper replacing paper. Different weight. Different weather. Across town, she posted a single-line statement: "Lawfare won't silence survivors." It climbed briefly, then slid, a stone skipping once before it sinks. Sponsors issued their last rites. The charity's site redirected to a placeholder with the bland menace of legalese. The cousin's account went private. The man in the hoodie disappeared from rosters. The web that had held me was caving inward with a sound like distant thunder. I went home, turned off every light, and stood at the window until the city blurred. The broadcast hadn't been revenge. It had been a mirror angled correctly at last. She had stepped in front of it on her own. The confession wasn't a sentence, it was an echo, her words returning without the music she'd relied on. And in the hush after, I finally believed something simple: justice doesn't roar. It accumulates, fact by fact, frame by frame, until even the loudest lie has nowhere left to stand. Tomorrow would be paperwork. The day after, court. But tonight belonged to the quiet. Tonight, the world heard the truth with the sound off, and it was louder than anything she ever said. Morning arrived pale and thin, the kind of light that feels like hesitation. The storm had wrung the city clean. I watched it through the window, streets glistening, air humming, newspaper pages plastered to the sidewalk like confessions left out to dry. The night's broadcast had detonated across every feed. The words false testimony and fabrication trended side by side with her name. My phone pulsed beneath the weight of it, vibrating with apologies from strangers, offers for interviews, requests for forgiveness I had no inventory for. I didn't answer any of them. Silence had carried me this far, it would see me through the ending. By noon, the attorney called. "She's agreed to cooperate," he said. "Full deposition tomorrow." His tone was professional, but I could hear the fatigue underneath, months of building a case brick by brick, only to watch it crumble under its own gravity. "You'll need to be present for the record." "I'll be there." The courthouse looked different this time. Less fortress, more theater after the curtain call, half-empty corridors, echoes of voices that had once judged and speculated. Reporters lingered outside but didn't shout questions anymore. They knew the story had already answered itself. Inside, the conference room was sterile, fluorescent light, glass table, microphones poised like small interrogations. She arrived 10 minutes late. No entourage, no makeup team, just a lawyer carrying too many folders and a woman whose posture had forgotten the choreography of fame. She looked smaller than memory, like the air had begun to refuse her. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the court reporter adjusted her headset, and we began. The lawyer started with prepared statements about media distortion and emotional distress. The investigator interrupted softly. "Ms. Dash, did you or did you not stage the crime scene on the night of April 3rd? Her silence was longer than her answer would be. "Yes," she said finally. One syllable. Flat. The sound of a door closing. I watched her hands. They trembled when she signed the transcript but steadied as soon as she set the pen down. Performance instinct, she couldn't help it. Even at the end, she wanted control over how the moment looked. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper, but she brushed him off, eyes fixed on me. "You think this makes you innocent?" she asked quietly. "It makes you honest," I said. "For once." She laughed, a hollow, fractured sound that startled even her. "Honest? You don't understand what people pay for honesty. They want stories." I gave them one. She wasn't wrong. The world hadn't just consumed her lie, it had sponsored it, monetized it, decorated it with hashtags. She was the architect, but everyone else had furnished the temple. And I, the designated monster, had been its foundation. Afterward, I walked out into a corridor thick with stale air and paper dust. The attorney caught up, muttering logistics about restitution, court dates, public statements. I barely heard him. The building's hum, the low electric throb of old wiring, was louder than his words. Justice isn't a crescendo, it's an engine cooling after overuse. Outside, the press waited again. A young reporter, probably new, held out a microphone with shaking hands. "What happens now?" she asked. "Life," I said. "That's enough." I went home through streets that had once spat my name. Now they just moved around me, indifferent, which was its own kind of mercy. On a corner, a billboard that had once shown her smiling face now bore an advertisement for insurance, same soft lighting, different ghost. The universe, I realized, doesn't erase, it repurposes. Weeks passed. She vanished from the news cycle, then resurfaced in footnotes, court dates postponed, assets seized, a pending plea. No one celebrated, the audience had already migrated to a newer outrage. Fame's aftertaste is anonymity. The empire she built from fiction had been absorbed by silence, and silence doesn't refund attention. Sometimes, late at night, I replayed the footage, not out of cruelty but confirmation. Proof that it had happened, that my mind hadn't invented it. Each time, I stopped at the same frame, her looking into the lens, whispering, "Did it sound believable?" It did, once. Too believable. The line that ruined her was the same one that once ruined me. I started rebuilding in increments: work, routines, ordinary kindnesses. The world didn't hand me redemption, it simply stopped resisting my existence. Neighbors nodded. The clerk at the grocery store asked about my day without knowing it was a miracle. Ordinary was the new luxury. One evening, I returned to the river path behind the courthouse. The water was high from the storm, reflecting the city's fractured lights. A busker played something soft on a violin, the notes rising thin and hopeful. I stood there a long time, watching reflections break and mend themselves on the current. Somewhere behind me, the courthouse clock struck 9. The monster she created had disappeared. I'd buried him somewhere between the headlines and the evidence files. What remained was quieter, sharper, human again. She had forged me out of accusation, but in exposing her, I'd found something she'd never understood. Truth isn't performance, it's persistence. As I turned to leave, a gust carried the last of the rain into the air, glittering in the streetlight before falling back to the river. The ripples spread outward until they vanished into motion, neither creation nor destruction, just continuation. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned.